Startuprad.io, your podcast and YouTube blog covering the German startup scene with news, interviews, and live events.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is Joe from Startuprad.io, your startup podcast, YouTube blog and radio station from Germany, Austria and Switzerland. Today I would like to welcome Max again. Hey, how you doing?
Hey Joe, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. People may know you as the co-founder of Endothane that I interviewed recently, but we're here because you kind of shifted careers.
I mean, I think that's a lot to say. Endothane is still very much up and running. And as a matter of fact, in December, we closed our last financing round. We were kind of discreet about it because we don't really profit from a lot of media attention at Endothane. And that's why we're not searching for it. However, as you might remember, Endothane is focused on creating new drugs for the treatment of psychiatric and neuropsychiatric diseases. And as such, we conduct clinical trials in order to obtain FDA and EMA approval. Now, these trials and why these studies are running, my personal involvement as non-scientific co-founder of Endothane is somewhat limited. So my primary duty is always to create the infrastructure, the setting, and primarily the financing needed in order to conduct the studies. Once that has happened, my involvement is not needed to the same extent as before. So we're in this situation, which allows me to also follow other avenues I'm very interested in and leave the day-to-day operations to the scientific co-founders of mine, mainly Catherine Rohrleder.
I see. And we are talking because one of those venues you've been talking about is setting up a new VC fund in Berlin. You have announced this, I do believe, a few weeks ago?
Yes, indeed. Very excited about that. We founded Blue Forest Ventures. We're based in Berlin. However, we invest across Europe and selectively in North America and Southeast Asia.
I see. And of course, the first important question everybody has on their minds, why Blue Forest?
Now, I could tell you like the beautiful marketing story that I could make up around this, which is that I like the metaphorical image of individual trees representing our portfolio companies that do stand alone but are all interconnected with their roots below the ground. However, the truth of the matter is that it's a combination of one of my favorite strategical frameworks, which is Blue Ocean, which is about having a different perspective on your strategy and trying to think outside the box. And the second part, so the blues from that, and the second part, the forest, is from my favorite algorithm for predicting basically future events, which is a random forest. And since this venture capital fund, and we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, I'm sure, is heavily data driven and heavily driven by the attempt to use data to predict the future as much as possible, this felt very adequate and fitting to a name.
For the people now following us, we first may get out of the way that you're early stage investor. That means people can pitch you a pre-seed seed. Are you also doing Series A?
Typically, we wouldn't. We might participate in a Series A because obviously we do save up a certain amount of our total funds in order to be able to do follow-on investments. So if we're already invested through pre-seed and seed financing in a company and we feel for whatever reason we want to participate in the Series A, we can. However, that's certainly not our sweet spot.
What was the core vision, the idea behind it, why you've set up this fund? Was there like one event, 1 minute where you thought, oh, that struck me, that's why I decided to set it up? Or was it a gradual process?
I mean, I think there's element of both in there. I think at the core, there's a fascination with two things. On the one hand, the fascination with science and with the scientific attempt to solve the problems that we face. So we haven't mentioned that so far, but Blue Forest is focused on deep tech companies solely. So companies that come from a scientific or engineering background. Now, this fascination of the scientific approach is paired with the specific stage that these companies we're looking into are in, which is pre-seed and seed, which means really the first institutional money they typically get. So you have a university project, a PhD project, where a team comes together because they have an idea to commercialize a scientific solution that they've discovered. And now they might become part of an accelerator program or an incubator program. They might get a little bit of grant funding, but there comes the stage where they need to sort of leave the nest, so to speak, and receive the first external financing. And this is us. We want to help these companies with that leap. And in my experience, and I can tell that from my own experience, having founded a biotech before, this first step outside of the protected environment of this academic background into the commercial world is one of the most difficult steps to achieve as a startup. And specifically to obtain the amount between 250,000 and $1 million is very difficult because there are not a lot of VCs that are ready to invest ticket sizes that small. And so there's the fascination of the complexities of the situation on the one hand. And on the other hand, maybe more towards the, oh my God, now we can do it. The one thing that always bothered me in early stage venture capital is that the conflict you have between having to look at hundreds and hundreds of companies in order to find the companies you're interested in, on the one hand, and your fund size is limited, so the budget you have through your management fee is limited. And so there's this conflict of you don't really have enough money to do a proper job in evaluating all the companies you look at. So you have these VCs that do what's called spray and pray, and they just invest 50,000 in whatever company basically has halfway of a PowerPoint presentation in a certain segment, and they just hope that one of them will make it. And there's the other sort of segment, and that's not an attack on anybody, but that's like, okay, I've come from this world of venture capital. Now I am some sort of a guru, and through sitting across from somebody, I can somehow feel whether they will have what it takes to be successful. I don't really think that that's interesting. Even if it was true, it wouldn't be scalable or repeatable. So the moment that really brought my partners and I to this moment of, yes, we can do it, is basically the possibilities that arose through robot process automation, as in AI and the AI tools that are available now, in the combination with the computation cost that basically went down dramatically over the last years, which means that the kind of mathematical modeling that was reserved to hedge funds and large funds in the past is now achievable for small funds as well. And that means that we can save so much time and so much effort on the human resources side that we can do a proper job evaluating those companies. Right. And so I'm sorry for the little bit long answer to that question, but the reality is it's a combination of all these factors that led us to be like, okay, now is the right time. We're ahead of the curve with this approach, and we want to do this.
Let me quickly structure my thoughts here. So, at first, not trying to make light of the situation, because an investment, the first VC investment may have a life-changing impact. Hopefully for the better. But it sounded kind of like you are the business body of a more scientific oriented founder team. Would that be appropriate to say?
I think that's not making light of it at all. I think that's, I think that's appropriate to say. I typically say it in a little bit different way, which is we are also translators, right? We translate because very heavily scientific founding teams with typical scientific backgrounds on the one hand don't really speak the same language, so to speak, as the investors world on the other. And in a way, there is almost a translation needed from a complex solution to a compelling equity story. And we believe that there is lots of good projects and lots of good ideas and even good teams with high potential where their ideas never get funding just because they were incapable of translating the idea into a shape and form that's digestible for most VC investors.
And the other question I had is where, or the statement or explanation, call it as you like, because you are aiming for around 60 million euros in your fund, and the people are calculating in their head, well, they can make up to 60 investments, but that's not necessarily true. As you said, you may participate in a Series A round, so that means you have assigned some of the money for the initial investments, and then maybe half or even a larger part for the so-called follow-up investments that you still have a relevant stake, a big stake in the startups that are doing successful further fundraisings, that are growing successfully, right?
Absolutely. So we're aiming to have a portfolio size of around 40 companies, which means that we're aiming to invest in 40 initial companies and have the rest as follow-on. So now if I tell you that our average ticket size will be between 500 and a million, right, you can do the math very quickly that we save up to 40% to do follow-on investments. And that's a fairly standard ratio, specifically at early stage to have some dry powder to do follow-ons.
We've been talking about ticket size. We've been talking about the stage, but we have not talked about which industries, which sectors are you investing in? And little disclaimer, if there would be only AI, it would be too boring and we wouldn't have an interview here. You are talking about deep tech, but very differentiated. What kind of investments you are looking for here?
Look, I think let's start by talking about what deep tech really means, because as AI, deep tech feels like this almost label that people slap onto something and nobody really knows what it means. So at the core of it, deep tech just refers to technological solutions for complex scientific or engineering problems, right? So now I understand that that's very broad, and it is broad, right? And we're not trying to say it's not a very broad field. Now we invest across a very large part of that field for two reasons. First, there's every venture capital fund, every investor has to ask themselves the question of what do they bring to the table for the companies, right? And a lot of VCs specialize in certain fields and certain industries, and so they can bring a lot of industry and field specific knowledge to those companies. However, that's not what we primarily claim. Of course, we can bring that through our network of advisors and through our network in the industry, but our primary asset that we bring to the table is in the translation, is in everything that's not specific to the deep tech field we're talking about. Because these founding teams often struggle with most of the other issues that are not related to their specific technological invention, right? They struggle with creating a proper business plan, with assessing product market fit, with building the structures, with building the teams that are necessary to achieve their goals. And that's where we come in and we can really help them. And so this is true for all of the segments of deep tech. Now, the only reason that this is possible is because of the stage we're investing in, right? If we talked about a Series A company, that wouldn't be possible. We would need to specialize, because the problem that a Series A company faces has nothing to do anymore, or very little to do anymore, with creating a proper business plan. They're past that, right? So in a way, the stage we have selected allows us to be very broad in our investment approach. And the second part is the sectors we don't invest in, right? And it pains me to say, but drug development, the company I co-founded, would not fall into our investment scheme, right? And this has something to do with drug development and all the deep tech fields that are heavily regulated. One of the biggest risks they are facing is of regulatory nature. And the regulatory risk is very difficult to hedge outside of being very specialized in the field, right? Because you have the scientific side, you have the, what we bring to the table, the financial, the business side. We can handle these two, right? But if there's the complexity, the added complexity of a very, very complicated regulatory process, that is highly specific to the specific field we're looking into, that's something we cannot handle on top of it. So unfortunately, drug development would fall into a category of company we cannot invest in.
So my understanding is that drug development, especially if you want to do it on an impact on a medical scale, is very, very expensive. We do have this frequently in our news that goes up to the billions.
That is so, and the money is not our primary concern, although, I mean, we wouldn't participate significantly in the total needed funding. But our primary concern is that you need to be an expert in the regulatory environment in order to be able to handle these kind of investments.
Talking about investments, what kind of criteria do you use to evaluate your investment? Because as we've been talking, it's very specific. It's very scientific. You just cannot say, well, it's an e-commerce shop. They do it as much as this. This is the multiplier of a public listed company. That is what I can use. That just doesn't work. It's way more complex than that, right?
That is true. And that's a very, very good question. It's going to be a little bit of a longer answer, but bear with me. There's certainly, and that's something I hear a lot when talking about this with other early stage venture capitalists, that tell me, well, Max, it's nice that you say that you're data driven. It's nice that you say that you want to evaluate the companies in a more in-depth way, but these companies are so young. There's no data on these companies that is available for you to evaluate. And I'm always saying, well, that's only true really in part, right? Because yes, there is no data about the companies, or not much data about the companies in terms of financial data. That doesn't mean that there is not a lot of other alternative data that's available around the markets, around the scientific field, around the founders themselves, right? And we're talking beyond the track record of the founders. We're talking about the background of the founders, even as far as the credit scores of the founders, right? Those are all information that exists out there. And now, before creating a discussions I don't want to create here, I'm not saying that a good or bad credit score is either good or bad, right? But I'm saying it's a variable we're looking into to feed into our model that evaluates the companies we invest in. Now, the general criteria is still a lot of the times the same across VCs, and it's the same for us. Obviously, we need to see a certain market potential, right? We need to see a certain value that's created through the solution that the company presents, because somebody needs to pay for it in future, right? And people will be willing to pay for it in function of the economical benefit that the solution generates for them, right? If I can solve a big scientific problem, but if it's if it's not reflected in a big economical problem for somebody, right, nobody will pay for it. Because the person still needs to make more money because he or she employs the solution that's presented. A quick example, right? I was working with this company in the field of photonics. Photonics now is a specific sub-segment of electrical optical modulation, which means the translation of an optical signal into an electrical signal, right? I mean, optical signal, glass fiber, all kinds of information, but our computers or our devices still work with electrical signals, right? And so the modulator, which is the core of every computer chip, really translates the optical signal into an electrical signal. We've inadvertently, a lot of people talk a lot about this because this is really the field where all the energy is lost and all the heat is created, for instance, because of the energy that's lost in this translation. So now a big step would be to solve, to create a more efficient and more capable modulator, right? So if you were to solve this issue, the problem you would be solving is immense. And the companies, the Intels of this world and other chip manufacturers of this world would be willing to pay a lot of money for somebody to solve that issue. Now, you might solve some other issue right around that. It's a huge market. However, if the problem that you solve is not significant enough for the people to change their process, then you will never be successful with it, right? If the gain in efficiency would be, 5%, then Intel is not going to rebuild its $1 billion gigafactory in order to adapt to it. It's just not good enough, right? So you always need to understand that there needs to be a market that's ready to pay for the innovation you've created. That some people call that product market fit, however you want to call it, right? You need to be aware of the market and that somebody needs to pay for the innovation. And a lot of people underestimate that that's not a view of right now. That's a view of in the amount of time that you need to get your product ready. So if you're still in the R&D stage, it's irrelevant what the market looks like right now. What's relevant is what the market will look like in 5 years when your product will be ready, right? And so this is something where I think it's possible to start to understand why it's so important to be data-driven, because the data-driven allows us to make much better predictions of future market developments and future product developments in order to assess not what's the market right now, but what will the market be when the product's ready. And the second big aspect is, okay, this is the goal where you want to go. What are the resources and capabilities that you need to achieve that? Right. And this is when it comes to the team. And obviously the team, and this is every VC is going to sell that. This is not the reinvention of the wheel, and I'm not claiming it to be. The team is one of the core factors that we evaluate. Now, the crux of the matter is what specifically, and I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty of it, but it suffices to say that we are very deliberate in the variables that we consider in terms of the team. And it's far beyond, does this person have a prior track record, or do I like this person, or do this person seem competent in the one-on-one? It's a lot of variables that are related to the professional and personal aspects of the founding team and the founder we sit across. And that again feed into the model that predicts certain variables. An example for that would be the founder's ability to raise money in the future, right? Because one of the key aspects of the success of a company is, will it have enough money to survive long enough in order to have success, right? Will the team be able to raise the money that it needs to fully develop the product? And of course, we help with that. And of course, we have a network and we'll support the team. But still, how likely is it that the team is able to do that? And there is now, I'm sure that everybody here has ideas right away. If I ask you, what are the variables you think that I can look at in order to make a prediction on the likelihood of you being able to raise future money, right? What are the personal and professional variables that I could look at? And this is something we spend a lot of time evaluating. We've looked at hundreds and thousands of past companies and past successful and unsuccessful startups in order to figure out the key variables that we need to consider in order to make certain predictions about these factors.
That's very interesting. So, bottom line, I do believe a large impact is on the team, on what you think about the team. Before I get to my next question or a question following that up, when you've been digging so much into past successes and failures, was there a variable that surprised you the most, either predicting success or failure?
That's a very good question. It was surprising to see that, I'm very careful with now how the interpretation of the data and how I want to formulate this, because we are still in a stage where we try to really make sure that we narrow it down to the right variables, because you have multiple, so multi-correlated variables, right? Where it's really difficult to say, okay, which of these variables are in effect sort of predictive in it by itself, and which of these variables are just correlated to the predictive variables. But let me say it like this. According to the data, it looks like a heterogeneous founders team, which means if you have a large diversity in the founders team, right? Once you cross a certain threshold is very beneficial. So this is ironic, and the only way I can make sense of it is like this. At the beginning, if you're very different, it makes it a bit harder, right? At the very beginning, because it's just not as intuitive to communicate. It's not as easy to find a consensus and so on and so forth. But once you found a working mode to make that work, it becomes a huge asset, because you're much more likely to have a larger spectrum of ideas at the beginning of a problem solving process, right? And there is other research that backs that up to a certain extent, which shows that if you, in an ideation process, if you want to solve any kind of problem, and in the ideation process, you have a very large spectrum of ideas, and you start with a large funnel and you narrow it down as a team, that is beneficial to the solution, and you'll actually have a better solution. So we believe that founding teams, right, often you'll see that all the time. It's also friends, and you get along anyway, so you become a team. Yes, that makes it easy at the beginning, but don't fall into the trap that there is a risk if you always have the same opinion, right? It's beneficial to have different opinions in the team.
We talked a lot about the team, about the ideas. I do believe they're very diverse. Especially in this area, if you're talking about research, it's not only they have an idea, they evaluated something and then come around with a PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes it's even the complete life achievement of somebody who started out with a bachelor, did a PhD, and spent years and years in a laboratory. But in general talking, the idea to look seriously at it from your perspective should have progressed beyond just the PowerPoint stage, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the field of deep tech or in the field of technological development, you talk about what you call TLR, stands for technological readiness level, TRL, sorry, technological readiness level, right? And it goes from 1 to 10, where 1 is really the ideation stage and 10 is you're basically ready to go. There's around 3, 4, 5 is when it becomes interesting for us, because that means that you have done laboratory testing, you have built a certain lab scale prototype, and you have generated real data, right? So everything before that is really purely theoretical and wouldn't be ready for us to invest in, because we think that you need a certain proof of concept, right, in order to move forward. Now, I'll give you an example again to understand this. There was this it's a company we're currently evaluating, so I'm not going to go too deep into the details, but very exciting company that developed a material that if you mix it with water will have a huge effect on the ability of soil to retain water. So imagine to dumb it down almost too much, right? You're in the deserts, you have no water, right? Or you're in Southern California and you struggle with dry soils a lot, right? And the problem with dry soils is water goes right through it and minerals go right through it. So you typically have the problem you need to have a lot of irrigation water and you need to use a lot of fertilizers in order to get a proper yield. Now, this product, you mix it, it's a gel, right? You mix it into the irrigation water and it goes between the soil particles and it helps the soil to retain water and minerals. And so now on the ideation stage, that wouldn't have been enough for us to invest. But they now recently did large scale laboratory tests where they tested that with 7 different kinds of crops in the laboratory and literally observed soil with the product, soil without the product. And we look at the amount of irrigation I need and we look at the yield I get. And this product, for instance, has on average made the crop require 80% less irrigation water and still gotten 30% more yield, which is absolutely incredible. If that would prove correct on a large scale, absolutely incredible. But we needed this lab trial to be done before we can really evaluate it. So to come back to your question, as long as it was on the pure ideation stage or maybe like on the molecular design of the particle stage, too early for us. But as soon as it had these first lab trials and we come from a technological readiness 3 and we transition into 4, right, that's when it becomes interesting to us.
What I had in mind when I heard this was also, well, there can be some areas that barely get rain, but when it rains, it starts flooding down the stream, and you can also work on those areas. Very interesting thing. Let's go a little bit from where you're investing, how you're investing, a little bit into the fund itself, a little bit the market trends and the outlook, and then we're good. We are already talking for more than 30 minutes. By the way, did you study philosophy?
No, I didn't. I studied law, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but I haven't been working in law for the past 7 years, so it's been a while.
I see. Well, nonetheless, that explains the long answers. Don't worry. They're not going to diss you here. I really like the answers. They're well thought through. Talking a little bit about Blue Forest Ventures, the fund and the management. Can you describe a little bit how you guys are set up? Because if you currently go on your website, there is a logo on there and 3 locations: Berlin, London, and Manchester, but not a lot more. Can you tell us a little bit about the team and how you guys are set up? And I would also be interested because before we talked a lot about important places where you could find deep tech investments, because I do believe you invest all over Europe, right?
That's true. Let's unpack the questions. First off, about us and the team. So the idea to create this fund, I think a lot of us had sort of simultaneously or ideas around that, and I personally know my co-founding partner from business school, because after studying law, I also did an executive MBA at a business school in France. And I met my co-founder, Moises Gené, he's from Mexico. And trust me when I say this is a good example for having a fairly different approach to certain things and, making it arguably a bit more difficult at the beginning, but now we really see how it benefits us. But that set aside, I had another partner in Germany that ironically I've made 2 deep tech investments with in the past. Well, I advised him. He's an angel investor. And I basically created the contact between him and the deep tech investments that he invested in. And so we got together and we founded Blue Forest Ventures and took on right away a long-time employee of mine that I've hired right out of university 4 years ago. First at Sanity Group, then transitioned to Endosane, and now came with me to Blue Forest. So he's basically employee number 1 of our fund. So we are 2 full-time general partners, myself and Moises. We have our partner Julian, who is not a full-time partner and hence not a full-time member and hence is not a general partner, but is working with us very intensively. And we have Nicholas, our associate and employee number 1, and now we are in the process of hiring 2 analysts. Located in Berlin. What else is there? Yeah, fund size we've talked about before. We are quite efficient in our process as we've set it up in a way so that it can be very largely automated. Right. So, a lot of the things that typically take a lot of time away from people, specifically analysts, are fully automated in our process. So that saves a lot of time. And the other question that you had was the locations and why we chose certain locations, what we look at. So Berlin is purely opportunistic choice, right? And I would love to tell you that there was some kind of elaborate thought behind it. But the reality of things is Berlin is a good location for a venture capital fund in general. There's a lot of things going on in Berlin and there's quite a big ecosystem. Now, Berlin is not the most relevant location for deep tech in Europe, but it's the location where I had most of my personal network and we had the best chance to get something off the ground on a short-term basis. But we are all quite flexible and we all travel a lot, so we can easily cover Europe as a whole and even selectively, as I said at the beginning, Southeast Asia, North America. And the question of which locations are most relevant for us in terms of finding suitable deep tech companies is mostly related to the ecosystem that research institutes and academic institutions such as universities have created. So you really see a big correlation between the amount of successful deep tech companies and the support system and the information system even that these institutions have created around that. One of the primary examples of that, and really hats off to them, is what the ETH Zurich has created in Zurich around the ETH. There's a myriad of accelerators, incubators, support programs, people that will help you, people that will give you advice on how to set up a company, on what you need to be cognizant of, and so on and so forth. And you really see that creates a lot of it creates a situation where startups just have a better chance to take off, right? And so the ETH Zurich is certainly, or Zurich is a very relevant location for us. Munich is a relevant location for us. Eindhoven is a location, and certainly Cambridge, Oxford are relevant for us. And I could list more and more, but essentially, it depends on the ecosystem that is created in and around the research institutions and universities in these locations. Yeah, that's really it.
One of my questions would have been how you're trying to support the companies, but we've already talked about you being a translator, research into business. I do believe that was already a very valid point. I was curious, how do you measure success? On the one hand side, there's the financial success. You get a really big company. You get really successful in terms of finance because the valuation of the company goes up. You list them, you exit it one way or another. That is fine. But what else would you consider success with the companies you invest in?
Look, we're very fortunate in a way because the field we're looking into makes it very easy to combine success on the financial level, which I would translate to return, right? And positive impact on the other side, right? And now everybody talks about impact and sustainability. And oftentimes this is a tough choice to make between being return driven and being impact driven. In deep tech, the compromise you need to make in order to achieve both is not a lot. Because almost in the definition of deep tech, you have the impact that's imminent, right? And if you have a successful deep tech company, you will have a large impact. Now, is this a positive or negative impact is something that obviously is a question that you need to ask. But generally speaking, in the overwhelming majority of cases, we're talking about a positive impact and a clearly positive impact. Now, there are certain exceptions if we talk about certain defense application where really the only thing you could think of is defense application. But this is and obviously certain cases where, I don't know, I guess you could come up with innovation around, gambling or something that could qualify as deep tech. I'm really shooting from the hip here, but you see, it's almost hard to come up with something that would have a negative impact. So this makes it very easy for us to be able to say success means it has a great return and has a positive impact. And we have gone a step further and partnered up with an organization that is an expert in the field of the measurement of sustainability. And we are attempting to create something that we refer to as sustainability by design and a positive impact by design, which means one of the big things a lot of investment funds struggle with is that they have structures, they have their process, and now there's these regulations that come on top of that, and the regulations around impact. And if we talk about Europe, for instance, you have these Article 6 to 9 in terms of how the degree of sustainability you really want to achieve. And this is quite difficult to implement for a lot of funds, right? Because they need to basically retroactively take this set of regulation and apply it to their existing process, right? And that becomes quite tedious in terms of how do you report that, how do you track the KPIs, and so on and so forth. What we're able to do, and this is really nothing that I want to take too much credit for because it's just because we're new and we can set up structures new, is we integrate the measurement of impact and the measurement of the effect of the companies in future, the likely effect. We integrate that into our evaluation system. They're an integral part of it, which means that this is not something that we take into account separately in the aftermath or something like that, but that's an integral part of the entirety of our evaluation system. And this makes it much easier for us to be able to say, the companies that we invest in, if they're successful, they will also have a clearly positive impact on society, environment, and the world we live in, basically.
We are now talking for 45 minutes, mostly you, which is totally fine. The people out there already know my opinion and my voice enough. And I would only have two closing questions. First one, what are the market trends and emerging technologies that excite you right now, besides from AI? And then I'll have a second question, but this time I'll only bother you with one.
Okay, I'm going to try to keep it much shorter now. I don't know if you heard about the Gartner hype cycle, and basically the measurement of the hype. And I think that we're all subject to that in one way, shape, or form. What excites me really is data transmission and data storing technology. And I keep it that far because I think that whatever innovation we talk about, whether it is quantum computing, whether it's AI, whether it's the whole theme of like more specifically language, speech recognition, and so on and so forth, all relies or like all will add to the quantity of data that we, the world, needs to handle, right? And store and transmit and so on. So I think that the basic data infrastructure that we're talking about on a hardware and software basis is what fascinates me a lot. That was much shorter, right?
It actually surprised me. And the last question I would have, because it is important for a lot of startups, entrepreneurs, founders seeking VC investments. How do you stay informed? What kind of media, what kind of outlet, of course, obviously besides Startup Radio, need founders to get into in order to grab your attention?
I mean, we try to not be too much attached to these hype topics because that would be such a selection bias already at the get-go that would skew our entire model, right? Our model is based on a fairly unbiased gathering of information. So what we do typically is actually go to the universities, into the accelerators, and try to have a fairly objective look at the entire cohort of startup that is there. We also use a lot of scraping technology in terms of extracting information from certain databases and websites and the internet in general in order to fill up our funnel with leads. Now, of course, we follow certain large scientific publications and certain typical media outlets in terms of, I mean, I'm not saying too much if I say that we do canvas, for instance, LinkedIn quite regularly, although LinkedIn is tricky. I don't want to go too deep into that because they're very, very difficult to scrape. Obviously, we're following whatever compliance there is out there. But there is certain sources that go beyond publication, which we talk more about registration of patents, for instance, that we look into in order to get an idea of what's happening. We also follow a lot of the actual scientific publications coming out of certain universities in order to know what are the topics that they really focus on.
I see. So the only question left for me right now, everybody who has listened through this is obviously interested in either becoming an LP or pitching you for money. What is the best way to reach out to you guys to pitch you? Is it LinkedIn? Is it the website?
Both is fine. The website has an email address that's there. And LinkedIn is also fine. We follow both. We're very receptive for both. I'm also happy to be hit up directly on LinkedIn. I'm not very complicated with that at all. You know it. We communicate through LinkedIn a lot. So I'm somebody that does try to answer most messages I get on LinkedIn, for instance. But yeah, email is also perfect. You'll find an email address on the website.
Great. So I do believe that was everything from my side. Thank you very much for this very extensive interview. I really, really liked it, especially since I don't have to talk a lot. And I do believe that gives a very interesting behind the scenes insight of an early stage investor that is usually not available for most entrepreneurs here. Thank you very much, Max. It was a pleasure having you as guest.
It was a pleasure again.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too. Thanks. Bye-bye.
That's all, folks. Find more news, streams, events, and interviews at www.startuprad.io. Remember, sharing is caring.